He laid that foundation in order to basically give the context of what the EFF stands for and of who they are as the EFF, and then of course their foundation, what drives them, so where they get the inspiration from. I think that's the reason why when he started that long speech, which was 3 hours and 3 hours and a half, he really wanted to connect with the masses that are here, but of course reminded them of their original mission, why they were even founded in the first place, and then what is it they need to do now. He was saying that, Mfundo, because he himself did admit that they've suffered some setbacks in the elections. I mean, they lost 5 members in terms of parliamentary representation. And then, of course, they've had a number of high-profile individuals defect from the party going to the MK party. So that was the thrust of, of what he was saying right at the beginning. But overall, Mfundo, remember, this is a speech that happens once in 5 years, where you have to take stock of everything that you did. Every conference will mandate you with particular decisions that you need to do and implement. And then after 5 years, you have to come back and report back. You must tell these delegates who mandated you why you were not able to do certain things. Were you able to achieve that? So what were the obstacles? What were the reasons? So that is exactly what he was saying. So on the whole, he was basically saying they were on track. But remember, Mfundo, there was 2 years where the country, not even the country, where the world grappled with COVID-19 and a number of things stalled. And the EFF at the previous conference had decided that they were going to set up a school. So they were not able to do that. And one of the reasons was COVID. But of course, he said they've identified the area and the space, and they are basically ready to get going.
All right. So the 3 hours was warranted.
He used the opportunity to really touch on some, yeah, so I'm basically saying he also used the opportunity, Mfundo, to then touch on the current issues, where he basically said for the first time he felt that his party was being infiltrated and then was being sabotaged from within. So quite a number of things that was really said to obviously warrant that 3.5 hours. But I'm not sure if so people were still as attentive as when he began speaking. But of course, he said what he needed to say.
I suppose he's giving an account of the last 5 years since they took office in 2019. But I also heard him there stating that this time the revolution is genuinely under threat. But what else did he say on his political report in relation to other political parties, particularly the emergence of Umkhonto we Sizwe?
I think one of the things he was very careful, and I think was very deliberate. He didn't really mention many parties or even individuals by name. He would just refer to, I mean, you would know exactly who he was speaking about. But when it came to, let's say specifically around Umkhonto we Sizwe, I mean, he would basically say, I mean, you now have parties which all of a sudden say they would be uniting black people, and the people who are leading that party have been given the opportunity before to lead. So why didn't they do that? So basically saying it was very, very opportunistic, and even some of the individuals who were within their fold, he felt, I mean, these are the people he had been with, but somehow they were not with them. So when he spoke about the ANC, he would not even mention the ANC by name. He would simply say the former liberation movement. So, which then told you that I think he was very intentional and deliberate that he was not going to be mentioning names, but of course the things that he would speak about, South Africans would know exactly what he was speaking about.
Good afternoon, Rio. Good afternoon to the viewers. I mean, I think, a lot has happened since that election in May. A lot has transpired in the EFF. Particularly with the resignation of Floyd Shivambu, moving to the MK party. We saw other members of the EFF also resigning and joining the MK. So I think in a way you kind of seeing a CIC, a commander-in-chief, who's trying to make sure that this party remains relevant, that he himself is one that is going to lead this party and continue to lead the party. But again, as you rightly point out, it's quite a challenging environment right now for the EFF, and perhaps even for the fact that you've got a very disaggregated political landscape. You've got a lot of structural conditions that are uncertain. You've got the question of a new political party that has been formed by the leader of AMCU, which is the Labour Party, how that will play out, what kind of impact that would have on the EFF in terms of those areas, and particularly those election spaces where the EFF wants to build more traction, particularly in you would say the mining belt of some of these areas. It's going to be a difficult one. So I think in the one respect, it's a lot has happened, but at the same time he still has a level of effervescence. But again, the challenge is how much of that translates into traction on the ground.
This was the political report encapsulating some of the discussions that have been going on. And some of those discussions will find their way in the commissions where they will be discussed thoroughly. Yeah. I think one of the issues that would really be spoken about is that issue of whether to keep the student command or to turn it into the youth command, which will basically not only look at students. So these are part of the proposals. Remember, the actual conference, yes, it has started now, but the conference is on the policy discussions where they deal with issues. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, it's not so much about the theatrics, but it's about what is it that they've met here about. This is a political party with ambitions to one day wrestle state power. So if you wrestle state power, you must know why you even do that. So the vehicle, the elements, and the mechanisms that you have at your disposal, are they correct? So that is why time and again they'll go for the policy proposals. So that is one of the policy proposals. We had the youth leader from the student command basically saying, he's definitely against that, but that will be subjected to discussions. Other delegates will have their say. So that is where we'll see and hear if this is agreed. So the issue of the discussions and the commissions hasn't started yet. This is the opening day. After this, I think we understand that there's entertainment, and after this, they will start breaking into the commissions where they really discuss the issues that affect the country, and then, of course, issues that affect the party itself. So that's where the delegates would be able to express themselves, not only the leader, perhaps talking about his wishes, but these people who are here, 2,500 of them, who have come really to discuss the future of EFF, the future of this country, and the continent.
You could see that he was taking a swipe at among them. His former deputy, Floyd Shibambu: "We must never allow our enemies to define us. They will attempt to discredit our achievements, and it's disruptive and insignificant," referring, I would imagine, also to the likes of the ANC. But he is obviously hurt, or takes, at the very least, takes the criticism pretty seriously.
Absolutely. I think it runs deep. It's a wound that runs very deep for him, particularly in the context of the fact that with Floyd's exit of the party, going to the MK party, and remember, KwaZulu-Natal is where I think some of the heavy losses of the EFF was recorded in the election. So in that respect, it's something that hits very close to home for him. And of course, the other elephant in the room right now is the whole question around Ndlozi and what happens in that context as well. And so I think he's feeling those wounds. He's feeling that vulnerability. And of course, the idea is to actually try and capture back the space, to try and say, well, this is, we mustn't let our enemies hurt us. They're not going to be able to wound us, etc. But again, it's typical fashion of when you are in a situation where you want to make sure that you are not seen as vulnerable.
The future of the EFF under the banner Defend, Rebuild and Advance. And I suppose the commissions are the most important because they'll really shape and recalibrate the EFF. Honestly, looking forward to one other discussion document being the one on Pan-Africanism and internationalism, because their foreign policy has been one that some have said has probably led to their poor showing because of many South Africans having felt that opening the borders would be problematic at a time when South Africa itself is barely able to cope with those within South Africa.
That's the migration policy. It will be really interesting when the commissions are sitting to hear what the ordinary members of the EFF will be saying about this, particularly Mfundo, because they are the ones that are really affected by what is happening. Most of the delegates here are under 40 years of age, so generally they are classified as young people. So they are the ones who are being affected by what is happening, particularly when it relates to the issues of migration. So when they meet, then they decide their future. It will really be interesting. Well, not really rejecting the continent or the world, because the EFF is very clear on why it was formed and its outlook. But first of all, it must also be able to deal with issues at home, and at home that means South Africa. So how will they work around those? It will be interesting. I mean, the view of Malema himself is very well known in this regard. So clearly we would want to hear what these other delegates that represent the generality of the masses say about it. Of course,
I mean, he does admit that some of their structures, to use his words, are not fit for purpose. And he also concedes that some of the things they borrowed, or as he put it, that they adopted from your ANCs aren't actually or quite working for the EFF.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big dilemma for parties that kind of spring out of the ANC. I mean, remember, the EFF comes out of a turbulent time between the Youth League that Malema was leading and the tension with former President Jacob Zuma. And so many of these structures are just replications of how they know the architecture and the ecosystem and the infrastructure and the design of how a political party like the ANC has been formulated, or how it actually navigates its standard operating framework. And so they kind of do a cut, copy, and paste. And then of course it becomes difficult. I mean, you don't need to have more examples and look at some of the structures that some of the political parties that came out of the ANC, like the UDM. I'm not saying that they are in a crisis in terms of structure, but you can see how they tend to become much more corralled, much more narrower, they lose that vital space in terms of the strategic relevance and of course the way in which the party tends to condense itself around certain leaders. And I think that's a big issue right now for parties that come out of the ANC. We've seen the ANC also kind of going through its existential crisis, but we're also seeing those parties that emerge out of the ANC going, at some point, we have to watch as well to see if this is a phenomenon that will afflict the MK party. But at the same time, in the EFF, is this cut, copy, and paste model doesn't really find traction. And so it's going to create the kind of nervousness, the kind of headaches that you see, because it's a very centralized kind of approach in a way.